Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss once again, the former EU development funding that the Conservative government promised to maintain with post-Brexit levelling up funds, and how people are slowly starting to realise that this was yet another Brexit promise that when you unwrap it is actually just yet another Brexit lie. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So as members of the EU, various communities around the UK would bid for development funding. We were consistently getting between £5 and £6 billion per year in total EU spending in the UK, which is now all gone, of course, of which about £1.5 billion was for developing areas of deprivation. And there'll be some people saying, oh yeah, but Phil, that was just taken out of our membership fee. Now we've got the whole membership fee, we've got all that to spend. It's like, so why aren't we then? That's the real point of this. Why aren't we? We've got all that money back. Where's it gone? You know, when it became clear that we would be leaving the EU under hard Brexit terms, some people were turning their attention to this money, which is absolutely vital to lots of communities around the country that would be devastated without it. Money that was allocated according to need, not according to, who paid for a lunch with a Tory minister. But the Tories told us not to worry. When we leave the EU, we'll pay, we'll match that pay, the funding from the money we save on membership fees. And really, people should have smelt a rat at that point, because prominent Conservatives, including the now Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the Tory leader who took us out of the EU, had promised that money to the NHS. In fact, he actually promised an amount of money to the NHS that exceeded our membership fee, because when they put on the side of the bus £350 million a week, that was more than our membership fee. And they were said so at the time. So actually, he was promising the NHS a figure in excess of our EU membership fees. So if the government, were going to give more than our annual EU membership fees to the NHS alone, where exactly was the money coming from for the development funding? But people didn't smell a rat. Boris Johnson was able to promise the same pot of money to lots of different groups and causes without any of them thinking that maybe things weren't quite adding up. Then during the 2019 general election campaign, as well as get Brexit done, Johnson started banging on about levelling up. The idea of levelling up funding was being talked about, the implication being that extra funding would be found for deprived areas of the sort that were getting EU development funding. So was levelling up just matching EU funding then? In which case it wasn't levelling up, it was maintaining the status quo. After all, that funding was already there, courtesy of the EU. In order to really level up, the government would not only need to match the EU funding, but pump even more in. And this seemed to be what people inferred from their promises, even though some asked how the government could afford to spend much more, but also promised not to raise taxes. Sure, you can borrow for capital investment, but that didn't appear to be in their plans either. In the event, we have seen that we're not actually getting either promise made. They haven't kept taxes low. In fact, they've raised taxes even higher than necessary in order to be able to offer financial sweeteners ahead of the next election. That's the idea. They're going to tax us to the hilt now, so they can lower the taxes a little bit as the election looms. Not as low as they were during the last parliament, but just to try and pretend that taxes are coming down before they promptly turn off the tap again after being returned to power. It'll go straight back up then. But even the spending promises are turning to dust. This isn't the first time it's become apparent, really. When various parts of the UK saw how much levelling up funding they were actually getting, all were concluding that it represented less than the EU funds they used to get, and not just by a little bit either. Some places are getting like a few percent of what they used to get from the EU. So the levelling up funding is actually a reduction in funding. Imagine your boss doing that. Well done on your hard work, I'm going to give you a pay rise of 10%. Then they hand you a piece of paper with your new salary on it, and you go, but this is less than my current salary. Yes, enjoy your pay rise. What? Recently, Cornwall has been contemplating just what their voting has meant. See, this is a county that largely votes Conservative and voted Leave with 56.5% of the vote in 2016. They have projects ready to go. Projects that would have been approved by now were we still in the EU. But they cannot proceed because the government are still not handing over any money. Our Brexit government told such communities that they will eventually match the EU funding. Oh yeah, absolutely, we'll match that funding. Not exceed it, match it. but they want to do it in a way that is better targeted, they say, and less bureaucratic. Well, if it's less bureaucratic, how come it's taking way longer to administer? And if it's to be better targeted, how are they going to do that without more bureaucracy? I mean, targeting something better means having more information and taking longer to make decisions, doesn't it? That is the textbook definition of more bureaucracy. Perhaps they mean less bureaucracy and better targeted for them. The money will be divvied up to whomever offers the most money to Conservative ministers or their party. If so, I'm not entirely sure that this is what the Brexit voters of Cornwall had in mind when they signed away their futures to a group of posh, privately educated populists. And the concern about the lack of money has been felt elsewhere around the country as well. Projects that would normally have begun are on hold because the money just isn't there. The government say it's coming, but they won't say how much or where it will end up. So what would have been £1.5 billion worth of work whilst we're in the EU going ahead is now not taking place at all because there's no money for it. The government promised that they would announce details before Purdah, which is at the end of this month for the local elections, because after that, of course, due to that, they can't be making announcements like this. The fact that they would be making these announcements over 2 years after the general election and very close to local elections does make you cynically suppose that they are trying to work out where they can get the most political benefit from what is clearly a smaller spend. Another thing that is illegal and couldn't have happened in the EU, because funding should be allocated according to objective need. Yes, we understand that funding is also decided by the guiding political principles of the party in government, we get that, but it shouldn't be decided by where you think you can get the most support in marginal constituencies. And this is something that hurts Conservative areas almost as much as Labour ones. Like, if you are an area with a strong record on voting Conservative, like, to draw a random example, Cornwall, and the government are wanting to spend as little money as possible on community projects, why on earth would they allocate money to places such as these? To a transactional government, what's the benefit? They allocate public funding two ways. First, on themselves and their donors, the people who help them retain power. Second, just enough money to buy your vote. So they're only going to bother to buy your vote in an area where your vote matters. Key swing constituencies. So, what is the benefit to the government that thinks like this? They will spend it in constituencies where it could make the difference between winning and losing at the next election. That's it. In fact, actually, being the cynic that I am, you can even foresee the following scam. So the Conservatives say they're going to make these announcements just ahead of the local elections, right? So they make a series of funding promises just before we go into Purdah for the local elections this May. They promise some money to all of the areas that will be key battlegrounds at the next election, because that's where we'll spend it, the so-called pork barrel politics. But they'll also promise some money for some that are only important for these local elections. And once those local elections are over, the money promised to areas that aren't then of any immediate importance for the next few years suddenly find that their promised money doesn't actually materialise after all. The much smaller spends end up only going to a few show projects where there are clusters of swing voters who will be important at the general election. Then we come to the issue of devolved decision making. So the government argue that the fact, Cornwall, which received a lot of EU development funding, still voted to leave the EU. They say it proves that they didn't really appreciate the projects that this funding was used for. Which is a way better answer than saying it proves that a significant number of people in Cornwall fell for the dumbest lies and voted to deprive themselves of massive amounts of funding for their local communities. But let's take the government line here. They are suggesting that making a decision from afar about what will be most appreciated by the local population is tricky. That's what they're saying. In other words, the decision should be made more locally. If that's the case, why do all the projects have to go to Michael Gove's office for approval then? Why don't they just get an independent group to identify the most deprived parts of the UK and then give devolved authorities the money directly? And if you don't want decentralisation to that degree, if you don't trust local authorities, and frankly I don't, if they insist that central government needs to roll in approving the projects, then what possible justification can there be for not involving, say, the Welsh Government in decisions on Welsh funding, Northern Irish Assembly on Northern Irish funding, and Scottish Government decisions on Scottish funding? Just because impoverished English areas have to suffer on the whims of the government coke fiend doesn't mean the whole of Britain has to. Just doesn't add up, does it? Said it before, but their arguments simply don't make sense when you place them side by side. But what seems absolutely certain is that we have a government right now that thinks of themselves as a born-to-rule elite. They're not the custodians of public funding that they're supposed to be. As far as they're concerned, it's their money. And because it's their money, they get to decide what to spend it on. We've seen this in the past when they've been taken to court and says you can't do that. It's like the genuine anger that they express at the idea that someone can tell them what they can spend the public money on because they think it's theirs. You know, they will decide to spend it on themselves and those who can help them remain in power. There'll be a few crumbs thrown out to the peasants to keep them hopeful. In swing constituencies only. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.